Imagine an 8-year-old girl, standing tall in a corporate lobby, facing a CEO who thinks she's out of place. This is a story that'll shock you, inspire you, and prove that courage knows no age. Stay tuned to Black Voices, because you won't believe what happens next. Little black girl shows up for a job interview. The CEO finds out her mother is in the hospital and is shocked. "I'm sorry, but you must be lost, child. The cleaning department is in the basement." The receptionist didn't even bother to look up from her computer screen when she saw the 8-year-old girl standing at the marble counter of Blackstone Corporation. Leah Santos adjusted the strap of her school backpack and lifted her chin with a determination that finally made the woman look at her. "I have a 9 o'clock interview with Mr. Richard Thornfield for the position of project manager." The silence that followed was so thick, even the executives in suits passing through the lobby slowed their pace. The receptionist blinked several times, as if trying to process an impossible mathematical equation. "Very funny, dear. Where are your parents?" Here's where it gets unbelievable. An 8-year-old girl, representing her mother, about to take on a corporate giant. Keep watching Black Voices to see how this unfolds. "My mother, Claudia Santos, has been in the municipal hospital with pneumonia since last night," Leah replied with the same serenity with which she would recite her multiplication tables. "She spent the last 3 months preparing for this interview and asked me to come in her place to deliver her portfolio." At 8 years old, Leah already carried responsibilities on her shoulders that most children would never know. The daughter of a brilliant engineer who had been systematically rejected in dozens of interviews, always with polite excuses that masked obvious prejudice, she learned early on that the world would not be fair to people like them. The night before, as her mother coughed violently in her hospital bed, Claudia had held her daughter's small hand with desperate strength. "Promise me, Leah. Promise me you'll deliver that briefcase. They need to see that we're more than they think we are." An imposing figure emerged from the executive elevator. Richard Thornfield, CEO of Blackstone, known throughout the business district as much for his arrogance as for his selective hiring policies. At 45, he had built an empire by systematically eliminating any employee who did not fit his ideal mold of corporate excellence. His icy blue eyes scanned the lobby until they landed on the unusual scene. The sight of a black child in the immaculate environment of his company immediately bothered him, not out of compassion, but because he considered it an inappropriate intrusion into his space of power. "What's the problem here, Jennifer?" he asked the receptionist, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had no time for humanitarian nonsense. "Mr. Thornfield, this girl says she has an interview with you." Thornfield approached, studying Leah as a scientist would observe an interesting specimen. There was something disturbing about the way the child looked back at him, not with fear or admiration, but with a cold assessment that made him feel slightly uncomfortable. "Really? And what would your name be, little one?" "Leah Santos." "My mother is Claudia Santos, a project engineer specializing in strategic management and corporate sustainability." She opened her backpack and removed a folder organized with military precision. "She has prepared a complete presentation on how to reduce Blackstone's operating costs by 30% while maintaining the same quality standards." Thornfield raised an eyebrow, amused by the situation. The idea of a black child thinking she could impress him was almost comical. For years, he had perfected the art of rejecting unsuitable candidates with polite smiles and technical excuses that could never be legally challenged. "How lovely," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "And tell me, Leah, does your mother really believe that sending a child in her place demonstrates professionalism?" "She believes that competence speaks louder than prejudice," Leah replied, handing him the folder, "and that intelligent people recognize good ideas regardless of who presents them." For a moment, something flashed in Thornfield's eyes, a mixture of surprise and irritation. He opened the folder and glanced through the first few pages. The numbers were impossible to ignore. More than that, they were revolutionary and could save the company millions. But Richard Thornfield hadn't risen to the top by being impressed by emotional tricks from people he considered unsuitable for his corporate environment. He closed the folder with a sharp snap, as if dismissing something worthless. "Interesting," he admitted coldly. "But tell me something, Leah. Did your mother really think an emotional trick like this would work on me?" That I would let myself be swayed by a touching situation? The question hung in the air like a sharp blade. Leah kept her gaze steady, but for a moment, something flashed across her eyes, not fear, but a kind of silent recognition, as if this reaction was exactly what she had expected. She said you'd reveal who you really are within the first 5 minutes, Leah replied calmly, her voice carrying a disturbing maturity. It seems she was right. Thornfield's smile faltered for a split second. There was something about this child, the way she looked at him, that bothered him in a way he couldn't explain, as if she knew something he didn't, as if he was being evaluated and found wanting by an 8-year-old girl. How presumptuous, he said, trying to regain control of the situation. Perhaps her mother should teach her some manners before sending her out to play grown-up. But as he spoke, Thornfield didn't notice that Jennifer, the receptionist, had discreetly activated the security recording system that captured audio. Nor did he notice that 2 black employees of the company, passing through the lobby, had stopped to watch the scene with increasingly grim expressions. What Richard Thornfield definitely didn't know was that briefcase contained much more than just proposals for operational improvements, and that underestimating a desperate mother and her extraordinarily courageous daughter would be the first step toward the biggest mistake of his career. If this story of courage and determination touched you, don't forget to subscribe to Black Voices, because what happened next will show you that some children carry secrets that can bring down entire empires built on arrogance and prejudice. Thornfield returned the folder to Leah with a dismissive wave. Tell your mother we appreciate the creative effort, but Blackstone has standards that simply cannot be compromised for personal situations. What standards? Leah asked, tilting her head slightly with what seemed like genuine curiosity. The question caught Thornfield off guard. For a moment, he found himself struggling to articulate a response that didn't sound exactly like what it was, pure prejudice. Standards of excellence, professionalism, people who understand how things work in the real world. My mother has 2 master's degrees, 15 years of experience, and proposals that could save your company millions, Leah replied calmly. What standards is she not meeting exactly? Jennifer coughed uncomfortably. A few employees passing through the lobby began to slow their pace, realizing something more serious was going on. Among them, Patricia Williams, one of the few black women in leadership positions at the company, stopped completely to observe the scene. Thornfield felt a growing irritation. This child was asking questions he would rather not answer publicly. Listen, little girl, this is no place for games. Maybe when you grow up, you'll understand how serious business works. I understand perfectly how it works, Leah replied, her voice remaining disturbingly calm. You reject qualified people for reasons you can't say out loud, then make up technical excuses to justify decisions you've already made before you even look at their resume. The silence that followed was deafening. Thornfield looked around, realizing he now had a sizable audience. Black employees watched the scene with increasingly tense expressions, and he could feel the weight of every gaze. Her mother must be very proud to have raised such an audacious child, he said, trying to regain control with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. She is, Leah confirmed simply, especially after she found out about Blackstone's hiring pattern over the last 5 years. A chill ran down Thornfield's spine. There were internal protocols, confidential memos, hiring strategies that should never have been leaked. What pattern? Leah opened her backpack again and took out a second folder, smaller than the first. Mom spent a lot of time researching before she applied. She found some interesting things about corporate diversity, or rather, the lack of it. Thornfield's confidence began to waver. There was something about the way this child spoke, the way each word seemed carefully chosen, that made him uneasy. It was as if she were following a specific script. Statistics can be manipulated, he said, trying to sound casual. But his voice betrayed his growing nervousness. They can, Leah agreed, opening the folder slightly to reveal photocopies of documents that made Thornfield pale. But it's hard to manipulate internal emails, memos, and meeting recordings, especially when people think they're just talking among like-minded people. Thornfield's blood ran cold. Those documents, how did an 8-year-old have access to internal company communications? I don't know what you're talking about. Of course, you do, Leah replied, closing the folder with a movement that mirrored the dismissive gesture he had made moments earlier. The question is, do you want to find out how much Mom knows here in front of everyone? or would you prefer a private conversation? Patricia Williams approached discreetly, pretending to check something on her tablet, but clearly interested in how the situation would unfold. Other employees made similar moves, creating an ever-growing audience for their CEO's public embarrassment. Thornfield realized he was being manipulated, led by an 8-year-old into a trap he couldn't quite identify. "My office, now," he said through clenched teeth. "Great choice," Leah replied with a smile that seemed strangely adult. "Mom always says important conversations deserve privacy." As they walked toward the elevator, Thornfield tried to process what had happened. How had an unemployed engineer and her young daughter obtained inside information about his company? More importantly, what exactly did they know about his hiring practices? In the elevator, Leah watched the numbers rise with her usual calm, as if she were strolling through a park instead of facing one of the most powerful men in the city. "Mr. Thornfield?" "What?" he asked, his irritation clearly visible. "Mom always says that the most dangerous people are those who have nothing to lose. We both fit that category now." "You're just a child," Thornfield replied. But his voice sounded less convincing than he had hoped. "I am," Leah agreed quietly. "But children ask questions that adults are afraid to ask. And sometimes, those questions are exactly what the world needs to hear." The elevator stopped on the 40th floor, and the doors opened to reveal the immaculate surroundings of the executive office. But as Thornfield led Leah down the hallway, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't leading the situation. He was being led by her. His secretary, Mrs. Davidson, looked surprised to see the CEO accompanied by a child. "Mr. Thornfield, your 10 o'clock meeting, cancel everything until further notice," he said abruptly, opening the door to his office with more force than necessary. As Leah calmly entered his corporate sanctuary, looking with interest at the awards, certificates, and photographs that decorated the walls, Thornfield closed the door and turned to face her. "Now, let's settle this once and for all," he said, trying to regain his authority. "What exactly do you and your mother want?" Leah sat down in the chair across from his desk, her feet dangling slightly above the floor, but her gaze remained steady and determined. "We want exactly what we've asked for from the beginning, a fair chance. But it seems you'd rather do this the hard way." Each new revelation from this impossible child was writing his own sentence of defeat. And the scariest part was that Richard Thornfield was beginning to realize that it might already be too late to stop what was coming. For a moment, when she smiled politely as she organized the folders on her lap, all observers would think they were seeing just a child visiting the office. But those who know true power know that it sometimes comes in the most unexpected and devastating packages. Thornfield closed the office door and walked behind his imposing mahogany desk, trying to re-establish his position of power. "All right, little girl. Now that we're alone, how about we stop this charade, and you tell me what you really want?" Leah settled into the chair as if she were at home, swinging her legs as she organized the folders on her lap. "Acting? Mr. Thornfield, I don't know what you're talking about. I just came to deliver my mother's portfolio and discuss her qualifications." "Cut that," Thornfield growled, losing the composure he had worked so hard to cultivate. "You mentioned internal documents, emails, recordings. An 8-year-old doesn't have access to that kind of information. Who's behind this?" "Mom always says that smart people ask the right questions of the right people," Leah replied, opening the second folder. "And that disgruntled employees are great sources of information, especially when they feel protected by anonymity." Thornfield's blood ran cold. Disgruntled employees. "Patricia Williams from Human Resources," Leah said casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. She was very upset when she found out that qualified black candidates were systematically rejected with fabricated excuses. James Morrison from the finance department was not happy when he learned that the company paid extra bonuses to managers who maintained cultural uniformity in their teams. Thornfield leaned on the desk, feeling the world spin. These were trusted employees, people he would never have suspected of treason. That's impossible. They signed confidentiality agreements. They did, Leah agreed cheerfully. But Mom found out that confidentiality agreements don't apply when it comes to illegal practices, and racial discrimination is a federal crime, isn't it? At that moment, Thornfield's phone rang. Mrs. Davidson, his secretary, spoke through the speakerphone. "Mr. Thornfield, there's a lawyer here who wants to talk to you. He says it's urgent and that it's about the girl in your office." Leah smiled. "Oh, it must be Dr. Martinez. Mom asked him to come pick up the documents after I finished the presentation." "What documents?" Thornfield asked, but he already knew the answer. "The copies of the emails, memos, and recordings I mentioned," Leah explained patiently. "Mom always makes backup copies. Dr. Martinez specializes in workplace discrimination cases. He said he's rarely seen evidence so what he called incriminating." Thornfield clenched his fist. "That's blackmail." "No," Leah corrected, her voice maintaining that hauntingly adult calm. "Blackmail would be if we were asking for money or special privileges. We just want what Mom deserves, a fair chance based on her qualifications." The CEO tried to regain control. "Even if those allegations were true, a company the size of Blackstone has the resources to fight any lawsuit. Your lawyers wouldn't stand a chance." "You're right," Leah admitted. "If it were just Mom against Blackstone, it would be an unfair fight." She opened the larger folder and pulled out a printed list. "But what if there were 57 of U.S.?" Thornfield took the list with trembling hands. Names, dates, positions they had applied for, qualifications, official reasons for rejection. A pattern so clear that even a first-year law student could prove systematic discrimination. Mom spent the last 3 months contacting people who were rejected by Blackstone in the last 5 years, Leah explained. She found that they all had something in common: exceptional competence and characteristics that didn't fit your ideal pattern. "Impossible," Thornfield muttered, but his hands trembled as he leafed through the names. He remembered several of them, candidates who were truly impressive, but whom he had rejected for reasons he would never admit publicly. Leah continued relentlessly. "Dr. Martinez said that a class action lawsuit like this could result in millions of dollars in damages, not to mention the damage to the company's reputation and possible federal sanctions." The phone rang again. Mrs. Davidson's tense voice came through. "Mr. Thornfield, there are journalists in the lobby. They say they want to talk about discriminatory practices at the company." Leah glanced at the watch on her wrist. "Oh, that must be the Channel 7 news crew. Mom scheduled a press conference for noon. She thought it would be interesting to give the media an opportunity to cover a story about social justice." "You can't do that," Thornfield whispered, panic finally breaking through his arrogance. "We already have," Leah replied simply. "The question now is, do you want to be remembered as the CEO who maintained discriminatory practices until he was forced to change them publicly, or as the visionary leader who recognized his mistakes and implemented progressive reforms voluntarily?" For the first time in his career, Richard Thornfield found himself completely outmatched by an opponent. And the fact that this opponent was an 8-year-old child only made his defeat more bitter. "What exactly do you want?" he asked, his voice defeated. Leah smiled, not the innocent smile of a child, but something more calculated, more determined. "We want justice, Mr. Thornfield. And luckily for you, justice can be much less painful than the alternatives." For a moment, as she methodically organized the papers in her briefcase like a seasoned lawyer, Thornfield realized that he had completely underestimated not just a child, but an entire family that had turned months of rejection and humiliation into a surgical precision operation. What he didn't know yet was that this friendly conversation was being recorded, and that the next words out of his mouth would determine whether he would walk away from this situation a reformed man, or another public example of how arrogance can destroy an entire career. "What exactly do you want?" Thornfield asked, his voice defeated for the first time in decades. Leah organized the papers with the precision of an experienced lawyer. "We want you to hire my mother, implement fair hiring policies, and compensate the 57 people who were discriminated against, or would you rather explain to the media why you rejected more qualified candidates than your current employees?" "That's absurd," Thornfield tried to regain his authority, but his voice came out shaky. "Even if I agreed to hire your mother, I can't just—" "Yes, you can," Leah interrupted calmly, "especially considering that this conversation has been recorded for the past 20 minutes. Thornfield's blood ran cold. "What?" Leah discreetly pointed to the small brooch on her blouse. Mom always says that important people make important confessions when they feel safe. Dr. Martinez will love to hear you admit that you reject people for characteristics that don't fit the ideal pattern. Thornfield stood up abruptly, panic finally breaking his composure. You can't use that. It's illegal to record conversations without consent. Not when it's evidence of federal crimes, a male voice said from the doorway. Dr. Martinez, a tall man of Latin descent, entered the office carrying a briefcase. Richard Thornfield, I'm Roberto Martinez, a civil rights attorney. I need to inform you that my client has substantial evidence of systematic discrimination. You can't prove anything, Thornfield growled, but the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. Dr. Martinez opened the briefcase and pulled out stacks of neatly organized documents. We have internal emails where you instruct managers to maintain cultural uniformity. Recordings of meetings where you discuss filtering out unsuitable elements, financial reports showing bonuses paid specifically for maintaining homogeneous teams. And this, Leah added, handing a tablet to Dr. Martinez, is a recording of our conversation from the last 20 minutes where he admits to rejecting people for not fitting the ideal standard. Thornfield slumped heavily into his chair, the weight of the situation finally hitting him. You planned all of this. We planned justice, Dr. Martinez corrected. And fortunately, we have more than enough evidence. The class action lawsuit we filed this morning includes not only discrimination, but also retaliation, creation of a hostile environment, and violation of federal civil rights. The phone rang insistently. Mrs. Davidson spoke into the speakerphone, her voice heavy with urgency. Mr. Thornfield, the board of directors is here. They say it's a legal emergency, and there are a lot of reporters in the lobby right now. Oh yes, Leah said cheerfully. Mom scheduled the press conference for now. Channel 7, Channel 12, and the Business Tribune. They want to talk about discriminatory practices in large corporations. Thornfield buried his face in his hands. You're going to destroy the company. No, Dr. Martinez corrected firmly. You destroyed your own reputation with your actions. We're just making sure there are consequences. The door opened again, and Patricia Williams entered with 3 other black company employees. Mr. Thornfield, we need to talk. All of us. Patricia, this isn't the time, Thornfield began. This is exactly the time, she interrupted. Because we finally have the courage to speak up. James Morrison is preparing a full financial report on the discriminatory bonuses. Sandra Davis from accounting has copies of all the emails, and Michael Chun from the legal department has already spoken to federal authorities. Thornfield looked around, realizing he was completely surrounded. You all betrayed me. We haven't, Patricia replied with dignity. We've stopped being accomplices to your prejudice. Dr. Martinez closed his briefcase with satisfaction. Mr. Thornfield, you have 2 options. We can resolve this civilly: immediate hiring of Claudia Santos, implementation of fair policies, compensation for victims of discrimination, or we can let the courts, the media, and the board decide your fate. And if I choose to fight, then prepare to explain publicly why a company that makes $300 million a year can't find room for qualified black professionals, Leah replied with a maturity that was startlingly adult. At that moment, Mrs. Davidson rushed in. Mr. Thornfield, your wife is on the line. She says she saw your name in the news online and needs to talk to you urgently. The empire of arrogance and prejudice that Richard Thornfield had built over decades was crumbling in real time. And the catalyst had been an 8-year-old girl who refused to accept injustice as inevitable. As he tried to process the extent of his defeat, one last surprise awaited him, because outside his office, Claudia Santos had just arrived at the building, recovered and ready to witness firsthand the victory her brave daughter had won on her behalf. I accept, Thornfield murmured, his defeated voice echoing through the silent office. I'll hire her mother, implement the policies, and compensate the victims. Dr. Martinez smiled, pulling a prepared contract from his briefcase. Excellent decision. The agreement includes the immediate hiring of Claudia Santos as Director of Diversity and Inclusion with a salary equivalent to that of the other directors, compensation of $200,000 for each of the 57 victims of discrimination, and the implementation of transparent policies overseen by an external audit. And if I refuse to sign? Thornfield asked weakly. Leah looked at him with that hauntingly adult calm. Then in 15 minutes, when Mom arrives, she'll hold a press conference explaining how a multi-millionaire CEO refuses to hire qualified people because of racial prejudice. I'm sure the board of directors will love to see the company's stock plummet. At that moment, Mrs. Davidson knocked on the door. Mr. Thornfield, there's a lady here claiming to be Claudia Santos. She says she's here to pick up her daughter. Send her in, Dr. Martinez instructed before Thornfield could respond. Claudia Santos entered the office with the dignity of a queen, despite her simple clothes and the obvious signs that she had just left the hospital. Her eyes met Lee's first, silently checking that her daughter was okay before turning to Thornfield. Mr. Thornfield, she said calmly, I've come to pick up my daughter and discuss the terms of my employment. Her hiring, Thornfield repeated weakly. Mom always says it's best to negotiate from a position of strength, Leah explained cheerfully, and we've discovered we have quite a lot of strength. 3 hours later, the news was spreading across social media like wildfire. Blackstone CEO implements revolutionary diversity program after confrontation with 8-year-old. The video of Leah entering the building and leaving alongside her mother, officially hired, went viral in minutes. Patricia Williams, now promoted to Vice President of Human Resources, personally oversaw the company's transformation. It's impressive, she commented to Claudia during the first staff meeting. In 6 months, our productivity has increased by 30%. Our reputation has completely recovered, and we've received the Best Company for Diversity award in the country. Thornfield, on the other hand, had been quietly removed from his position as CEO by the board, retaining only an honorary title with no real power. His reputation in the business community never recovered. He would always be remembered as the man who was publicly humiliated by an 8-year-old. A year later, Claudia walked the halls of Blackstone as one of the company's most respected executives. The diversity program she had implemented had become a national model, and she received invitations to speak at universities and business conferences. Leah, now 9, attended an elite private school, courtesy of the scholarship Blackstone offered to employees' children. But she still preferred to spend her afternoons in her mother's office, where she often surprised visiting executives with impressive business insights. You know what the most satisfying part was? Claudia confessed to Dr. Martinez during a celebratory lunch. It wasn't seeing Thornfield go down. It was seeing Leah learn that a determined person, no matter how young or underestimated, can change the whole world. What about the other 57 people who were discriminated against? 15 have already been hired by other companies that heard about the case. 20 started their own businesses with the compensation they received. The rest are using the money for education and training, Claudia smiled proudly. Leah created a wave of transformation that goes far beyond Blackstone. That same afternoon, Leah was in her corner of the office when a group of college students came to visit the company for a project on leadership. One of them asked what advice she would give to young people facing injustice. Never let anyone tell you that you're not good enough, Leah replied with a wisdom that continued to amaze adults. And remember, sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. As the students left, impressed, Claudia watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and admiration. That brave girl who had turned a rejected job interview into a corporate revolution was already planning her next project, a program to teach children from disadvantaged communities about labor rights and social justice. Richard Thornfield tried to destroy a family's dreams, but ended up destroying only his own reputation. Claudia and Leah learned that true revenge is not to repay the prejudice they suffered. It is to achieve the success their oppressors could never imagine, and to use that success to open doors that others tried to close forever. If this story of courage and determination touched your heart, subscribe to Black Voices for more stories that prove that no matter your age, background, or circumstances, when you fight for justice with intelligence and courage, you can literally change the world. After all, sometimes it's the youngest voices that can shout the truths that adults are afraid to whisper.